My stepsister's telling the family my boyfriend got her pregnant, just to feel better. Let me cut straight to the chase. 3.5 years ago, I was a 25-year-old woman with a heart full of hope, and that's when I met Tim, a charming 26-year-old guy. It was truly one of those serendipitous encounters that you only read about in the most romantic novels. I was having one of those crazy, hectic days at work. Deadlines were breathing down my neck, and I was scrambling to get everything done. I dashed into the local coffee shop, my laptop under one arm and a precarious stack of papers in my other hand, desperately trying to find a quiet corner to hunker down and finish my report. That's when I bumped into Tim. He was standing in line, waiting to order, and he must have seen the panic in my eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward with that warm, kind smile of his and offered to help me carry my things to a table. As we settled in and started chatting over our lattes, it was like a whole new world opened up. We quickly realized we had an uncanny amount in common. We both had a deep love for indie movies, often spending our weekends scouring the local art house theaters for the latest hidden gems. Old school jazz was like a soothing balm to our souls. We could talk for hours about the greats like Miles Davis and Ella Fitzgerald. And, oh, the dreams we shared of traveling the world. We'd swap stories of far-off places we wanted to visit, from the bustling markets of Marrakesh to the serene temples in Kyoto, each conversation fueling our wanderlust even more. Right from the start, it was like we were two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly. He was sweet, attentive, and we shared so many laughs and late-night conversations that made me feel like I'd truly found someone special. Fast forward a few months, and my mom had recently remarried. My stepdad was a decent guy, and we got along just fine. On lazy Sunday afternoons, we'd find ourselves lounging on the porch, sipping iced tea, and chatting about the latest sports games. He'd regale me with tales of his own athletic days and offer tips on how to fix up the old, creaky porch swing. Then there was my stepsister, Sarah, also 26. We were friendly enough. You know, the kind of relationship where we'd exchange pleasantries at family gatherings but wouldn't go out of our way to hang out. She was the epitome of a party girl, always chasing the next big night out. Her social media was a nonstop parade of pictures from clubs, her face flushed with excitement, holding colorful cocktails and dancing the night away with a wild abandon. In our 20s, our different lifestyles meant our paths rarely crossed outside of those family events. So, the day came when I decided to introduce Tim to my family. It was supposed to be a happy occasion, a chance for him to get to know the people who meant the world to me. I spent hours getting ready, carefully picking out the perfect outfit. I wanted to look effortlessly put together, so I rummaged through my closet, trying on dress after dress until I found that one that made me feel confident and beautiful. I made sure Tim looked his best too, fussing over his shirt collar and making sure his hair was just right. Little did I know it would turn into a complete nightmare. As soon as we walked through the door, I could sense the tension in the air. It was thick like a heavy fog that you could almost taste. Turns out Sarah and Tim had a history. They dated briefly when they were 20. According to Tim, it ended badly when Sarah got drunk at a nightclub and made out with another guy. Sarah didn't take it well when she saw us together. Her face flushed red with anger in an instant, and she went ballistic. Her eyes blazed with a fury I'd never seen before as she screamed that I had to break up with him. She called him her sloppy seconds, like it was some kind of dirty secret that she couldn't bear to have exposed. And she didn't stop there. She even tried to rope our parents into forcing us apart. She stormed over to them, her voice shrill, pleading her case and making wild accusations. I was shocked. I mean, it had been years since they'd been together, and I didn't even know Sarah back then. But there I was caught in the middle of this drama. My family, instead of standing up for me, seemed to jump on Sarah's bandwagon. They started saying we should break up too. My mom, who I usually counted on for support, just stood there with a look of uncertainty on her face. Her eyes darted back and forth between Sarah and me, as if she was trying to figure out who to side with. My stepdad mumbled something about keeping the peace and agreed with Sarah. It was like they were more concerned with avoiding conflict than standing up for what was right. And from that moment on, every family gathering became a minefield. Sarah would bring up their past relationship at every opportunity, acting like I'd stolen her boyfriend. She'd spin this elaborate tale to anyone who'd listen, her voice dripping with false victimhood. It was clear as day that she was jealous. But I loved him, and we were determined to make it work, so we just gritted our teeth and carried on. Despite the chaos that Sarah had unleashed at that fateful family introduction, Tim and I refused to let it derail our relationship. We held on to each other tighter than ever, determined to weather the storm. As the months slipped by, our bond grew deeper and more unbreakable. We took the plunge and moved in together, transforming a small, sunlit apartment into our very own love nest. The wall soon became a gallery of our shared memories. There were the Polaroid snapshots from our impromptu road trip to the beach, the salty wind in our hair and sand between our toes as we laughed and chased the waves. The concert tickets from that night we danced like nobody was watching, our favorite band playing until the early hours, the music pulsating through our veins. And the snapshots of our lazy Sunday brunches, where we'd mastered the art of making fluffy pancakes and perfectly poached eggs, the kitchen filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Our evenings took on a special kind of magic. We'd scour the internet for new and exciting recipes, from spicy Thai curries that made our taste buds sing to decadent chocolate lava cakes that oozed with indulgence. Then, we'd spend hours in the kitchen, aprons tied around our waists, laughing at our culinary mishaps like the time I accidentally added too much salt to the soup or when Tim set off the smoke alarm trying to grill chicken. But through it all, we high-fived over our successes, and the joy of creating something together was palpable. Afterward, we'd snuggle up on the couch, a soft, knitted blanket draped over us, and lose ourselves in the latest binge-worthy series or a classic movie from our shared list. During this idyllic time, whispers of marriage began to fill the air. Tim was dropping hints like breadcrumbs, and I was all too eager to follow. There were the not-so-subtle glances at diamond ads when I walked into the room, his eyes lingering a little too long on the sparkling solitaires. The casual mentions of dream wedding destinations as we strolled through the park, pointing out the perfect spots for photos and the most romantic settings for our vows. And the way he'd hold my hand a little tighter whenever the topic of forever came up, his thumb gently caressing my skin as if to say, "This is real, and we're in it together." It was all so intoxicating, and I could hardly wait to share my excitement with my mom. One sunny afternoon, I sat her down, my heart pounding with anticipation. I poured out my feelings, told her how I was certain Tim was on the verge of popping the question. I expected her eyes to light up, for her to pull me into a warm hug and squeal with delight. But fate had other plans. Just as I was in the middle of our heart-to-heart, Sarah, who seemed to have a sixth sense for ruining my moments, sauntered into the room. She'd recently moved back in with our parents, and her presence had been a constant thorn in my side. Without so much as a hello, she launched into a barrage of intrusive questions. "So, how often do you two fight? I bet it's all roses and rainbows until the real world hits, huh?" She sneered, her eyes glinting with a malicious glimmer. She leaned in closer, as if trying to sniff out any sign of trouble. "And does he really seem committed? I mean, men can be so fickle these days." I tried my best to brush her off, offering curt answers and avoiding her gaze. But it was clear she was on a mission. And then, she dropped the bombshell. With a dramatic flourish, she announced that she was 4 months pregnant. She painted a picture of a deadbeat dad, some faceless stranger she'd hooked up with at a wild party, who had promptly vanished when he heard the news. But, she declared, she was determined to keep the baby and brave this new chapter alone. At first, my heart softened. I knew how tough it must be for her, facing single motherhood. So, despite our rocky past, I put on a brave face and offered my support. I accompanied her to doctor's appointments, listening intently as the doctor explained the stages of pregnancy and the importance of prenatal care. I volunteered to babysit in the future, imagining myself reading bedtime stories and playing peekaboo with the little one. And I plastered on a smile, trying my hardest to be genuinely excited for her new adventure. But then, my world came crashing down again. My stepdad's text message pinged on my phone, and as I read the words, I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. He claimed, in no uncertain terms, that Tim was the real father of Sarah's baby. I was a whirlwind of emotions, shock, anger, disbelief. I confronted Tim immediately, my voice shaking and tears threatening to spill. His eyes widened in horror, and he vehemently denied it. "There's no way, baby. I love you, and I would never do that to you. I swear on my life, I'll take a paternity test right this instant to prove it." His voice was filled with desperation and sincerity, and as I looked into his eyes, I wanted so badly to believe him. I was so confused, my mind racing a million miles a minute. I didn't know who to trust. In a daze, I reached out to Sarah, demanding more details about their supposed encounters. She was visibly nervous, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her phone. She stuttered and stammered, giving conflicting dates and times that didn't add up. When she said they'd met up at a time I knew Tim was with me at work, and with the pandemic lockdowns in place and me working from home, it was nearly impossible for them to have had any in private time together. I was desperate to get to the bottom of this mess. My heart pounding, I texted Sarah, demanding she provide some real proof of her wild accusations. What she sent me in response made my blood boil. It was a set of clearly photoshopped screenshots, amateurishly doctored to look incriminating. I could tell right away because the text bubbles were distorted, the font was a bit off, and the alignment was all wrong. In one of them, she clumsily put Tim's name over a friend's number and pretended he was messaging her. I didn't waste any time. I reached out to the friend whose number had been used. He was hesitant at first, clearly uncomfortable with being dragged into this drama. But after some gentle prodding and my assurance that I just wanted the truth, he all but admitted that Sarah had asked him to help her with something silly, and then tried to laugh it off when I confronted him about the screenshot. It was obvious he knew it was wrong, and when I examined the timestamps on the screenshots more closely, I realized she'd badly photoshopped those too. The dates were all jumbled, and some of them didn't even make sense in the context of when the supposed conversations were supposed to have happened. By this point, I was more convinced than ever that Sarah was lying. But my family didn't seem to see it that way. They were still sending me hateful messages, saying I needed to break up with Tim and let him be with Sarah. They were completely buying into her lies, and it was tearing me apart. Every text that pinged on my phone from them felt like a dagger to my heart. Sarah was going all out, telling everyone that Tim was in love with her and that I was just keeping him away. She was playing the victim to perfection, and my family was eating it up. But Tim and I were still holding strong. We had long, heart-to-heart conversations where he reassured me again and again that he would never betray me like that. His eyes were filled with sincerity, and I could see the hurt in them that this whole situation was causing. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I told my parents that Tim was willing to take a paternity test. I hoped that would be the end of it, that the truth would finally come out and put an end to this nightmare. But my parents were still on the fence. They were so worried about Sarah, especially since she was pregnant and seemed so alone. They didn't want to believe that she could be lying, and it was like they were blind to all the evidence right in front of them. In an attempt to make them see reason, I gathered all the evidence I had, the inconsistent stories from Sarah, the fake screenshots, and Tim's willingness to take the test. I laid it all out in a detailed message and sent it to my parents, hoping it would finally open their eyes. But they remained unconvinced, caught up in their concern for Sarah. It was as if they'd forgotten that I was their daughter too, and that I was hurting just as much, if not more. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a glimmer of hope emerged from an unexpected source. The so-called deadbeat, who Sarah claimed had fathered her baby, reached out to me privately. Turns out, he'd been sure that he was the father all along, as they'd been hooking up at the time. But he was confused as to why Sarah was telling everyone else that Tim was the dad. He told me that Sarah had even told him she was having the pregnancy terminated, which was clearly a lie since she was now parading around, pregnant and demanding attention. This guy, who I initially thought was just some irresponsible fling, turned out to be a plumber with a very good income. And more importantly, he had a change of heart and wanted to be a father to his kid. He said he didn't want to be with Sarah at all, but he was ready to step up and support the child. When I shared this new information with my parents, they were stunned. It was the first crack in the wall of their blind belief in Sarah's story. But still, they were hesitant. They'd been so wrapped up in Sarah's drama for so long that it was hard for them to let go of their initial stance. Meanwhile, Sarah realized that people weren't falling for her lies as easily as she'd hoped. So, in a desperate attempt to save face, she switched tactics and started faking a mental illness. She'd post cryptic messages on social media about feeling so alone and misunderstood, and how her condition was making it hard for her to cope. But I could see right through her. I knew she was mentally unwell, just not in the way she was pretending. After all the lies and manipulation, it was clear she had some serious issues. I had also figured out what a master manipulator she was. She'd been feeding my parents tidbits and small lies over time, slowly building up her false narrative until it seemed more credible. She knew exactly how to play on their emotions, making them feel sorry for her and turning them against me so they'd more easily believe that Tim was in love with her. But I wasn't going to let her win. Tim and I stood our ground, and with each passing day, I could feel the tide starting to turn. My family was starting to question things more, and Sarah was becoming more desperate. She was so focused on getting attention for being pregnant and sick that she seemed to forget about her obsession with Tim for a while. But I still refused to be around her. I couldn't bear to look at her after all she'd done. Finally, the day we'd all been waiting for arrived. Sarah gave birth. I heard the news through my cousin, who went to visit her at the hospital. My cousin, bless her heart, knew how much this whole situation had affected me and sent me a photo of the birth certificate. There it was in black and white. The father was listed as the plumber, the so-called deadbeat, who had come forward to claim his child. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for the little baby. Growing up with Sarah as a mother was going to be a long and difficult road. She'd already proven herself to be so self-centered and irresponsible with her lies and manipulation. But I also hoped that, with the real father in the picture and willing to step up, the child would have a more stable and loving environment. With the truth out in the open, my family slowly started to come around. They realized the extent of Sarah's deception and how wrong they'd been to believe her so blindly. My parents came to me, their eyes filled with remorse, and apologized. It was a long overdue conversation, but it meant the world to me. We talked about how we let Sarah's lies drive a wedge between us and how we wanted to move forward and rebuild our relationship. And then, the moment I'd been dreaming of happened. Tim proposed. It was a beautiful, intimate moment. We were out on a walk in our favorite park, the sun setting behind us, casting a warm glow. He got down on one knee, pulled out a ring that he'd secretly been designing for months, and asked me to marry him. I said yes, of course, through tears of joy. We decided to plan a long engagement. After all the chaos we'd been through, we wanted to take our time and enjoy this new chapter in our lives. And one thing was for sure, Sarah was not invited to the wedding. We needed to protect our happiness and the new family we were building. This was our fresh start, and we were determined to make it a beautiful one, free from the past shadows. As I look back on everything that had happened, I realized how much I'd grown. I'd learned to stand up for myself, to fight for the truth, and to not let the lies and jealousy of others destroy my happiness. And now, with Tim by my side and my family on the mend, I was ready to face whatever the future held.